Billy the Kid was already a ghost with a price on his head when that evening found him in San Miguel Springs, New Mexico territory. His name rode ahead of him like dust on the wind. Even in the noisy saloon, people spoke it softer than they meant to. He sat alone at a corner table, boots crossed at the ankle, hat tilted low, a chipped glass of whiskey sweating in his hand, pretending he did not notice the way conversations rose and fell when his gaze drifted over the room. Outside, the sky was bleeding itself into twilight, all copper and violet over the desert, but inside the lamplight was thick and yellow, swollen with the smell of sweat, smoke and cheap liquor. A piano tried to hold a tune in the corner, while cowhands shouted over a game of cards, and a tired girl in a blue dress laughed at a joke that was not funny. The kid watched it all with those sharp, pale eyes that missed nothing and judged everything, including himself. He was not there looking for trouble, not that night. He was there because his horse was tired, because his ribs ached from a bullet that had come too close a month before, because for a few hours he wanted to feel like the world was small enough to be contained inside 4 wooden walls and the reach of his own guns. He lifted the glass halfway to his lips. That was when the doors swung open with a bang that cut the piano dead. 2 shadows filled the entrance like a pair of storm clouds walking on 2 legs. The saloon went so quiet that Billy heard the single soft clink of his own whiskey glass setting back down on the table. They were women, Apache women. Twins, at first glance, though no mirror ever showed such wildness twice. They stepped in side by side, ducking their heads under the lintel because they were taller than any man in the room, taller even than the door frame itself, well over 7 feet of muscle, braids and authority. Their skin was the warm bronze of sun-baked earth, and their eyes were dark and clear, scanning the room with the calm of warriors who knew exactly how dangerous they were. They wore fringed buckskin that had seen storms and warpaths, beaded belts and necklaces that caught the lamplight, and each carried a rifle slung casual over one shoulder, as if it weighed nothing. A knife hung at each of their hips, hilts worn smooth from use. Every man in the room suddenly remembered his hands and what they were doing with them. Some let go of their cards, some of their drinks, one of a dance girl's waist. The piano player swallowed and dropped his hands into his lap. Billy watched the women as they walked straight across the floor with the purposeful stride of people who had chosen their quarry before they ever entered the room. One of them, the one with a faint scar running like a pale river from her left brow to the edge of her jaw, met his eyes and did not look away. He felt something stir in his chest, not fear exactly, but something that made his fingers itch toward his guns more out of habit than intent. When they reached his table, the scarred one spoke first. "Billy the Kid," she said, her English carrying the rhythm of a language older than the town itself. "You look smaller sitting down." A low ripple of nervous laughter tried to rise from the surrounding tables and died in the dust. Billy leaned back a fraction, tilting his hat so his face was fully visible. "And you two," he replied, his voice dry as the desert, "look like trouble standing up." The second woman, whose hair was braided with a single white feather, let a hint of a smile touch her mouth. "My name is Tala," said the scarred one. "This is my twin, Naira. We did not ride 2 days to hear bad jokes, Billy the Kid. We came because we need you." The word need was heavy coming from her, as if it were not one she liked to use. Billy felt every eye in the saloon dig into his back. He took a slow breath. "You sure you found the right outlaw?" he asked. "Plenty of men around here more desperate than me." Tala shook her head. "We did not come for desperation. We came for a man who can make a bullet bend the way he wants and whose name makes sheriffs sweat in their beds. We came for you." Something unspoken passed between the sisters, something fierce and wordless. Billy saw the tension in their shoulders, the way their gazes swept the room, measuring danger. They were not just proud, they were on edge. He gestured to the empty chairs at his table. "Sit," he said quietly. "We can talk once the drunk boys stop staring." They did not ask permission from anyone else in the room. Chairs creaked under their weight as they sat, rifles angled within easy reach. Conversation slowly resumed around them, but softer now, like the saloon was trying not to wake something sleeping. Billy leaned in, elbows on the table, studying their faces, the nearly identical lines marked by years of wind and worry. "All right," he said. "You have got me curious. What sort of trouble are you planning to drag my name into?" Naira spoke then, her voice lower than her sister's, with a tired kind of gravity. "There is a bank," she said. 2 days' ride west, in Las Palmas. White town, White walls, white men with gold hidden behind iron. That gold was paid with Apache blood and land. We mean to take some of it back. Tala's jaw tightened. We have men, she said. Good warriors. But your towns and your sheriffs, your telegraph wires and schedules, we do not know them as you do. We need someone who moves easy in both worlds. We need someone the law fears more than it fears us. Billy considered them, tapping a fingertip against the wood. And what makes you think I care who owns the gold? He asked. I steal it just fine without speeches. Tala shrugged one powerful shoulder. Then think of it as a job. You get your share, we get ours. You get to embarrass a sheriff and a banker. We walk away with enough to keep the people fed until the next drought. No one loses except men who already took too much. That did sound like the kind of justice Billy understood. Still, he had been around long enough to sense something more. You said you have men, he said slowly. If they are as tall as you two, I do not see what you need my scrawny self for. For the first time, a shadow crossed Naira's face. Our men follow us into battle, she replied. But not all of them like that, they follow women. There was bitterness there, old and sharp. Some listen to any whisper that says we forget our place. We have enemies among our own as well as among yours. Tala's hand rested on the table. Fingers curled, knuckles scarred. We do not trust easily, Billy the Kid. But you, she said, eyes narrowing slightly. We trust to be predictable. You will do what keeps you breathing and what feels like spitting in the face of the rich. That is enough for now. He nearly smiled at that. They had a point. He had never claimed to be better than he was. He leaned back, letting the tension in his shoulders ease a fraction. All right, he said at last. Tell me the plan. They spoke in low tones for the better part of an hour, heads bent close together, while the saloon's noise washed around them. Las Palmas, a town that fancied itself civilized, with its stone bank building and its smug little clock tower. The bank's money arrived weekly by stagecoach and slept overnight in the vault before being counted and dispersed. The sheriff there was ambitious, eager to make a name off any outlaw bigger than him, and he had wired half the territory asking for more deputies and more guns. The Apache war party, Tala and Naira explained, would hit the outskirts at dawn, setting a false fire on the far side of town to draw the lawmen away. Billy and a small group would slip into the bank while the smoke and shouting pulled every badge and vigilante to the wrong street. It was simple, bold and dangerous, which were three words that had always sounded a lot like home to Billy. By the time they finished, his whiskey glass sat empty and forgotten. You realize, he said finally, if we misstep at all, we are not riding out of there alive. The governor will send every bluecoat in the territory after an Apache war party and Billy the Kid robbing a bank together. We do not need to live forever, Tala replied. We need to live long enough to change something. Naira's eyes met Billy's, and there was something searching there, as if she measured him and his ghosts. You have already died a little each time your name grew, she said softly. Maybe this time you can bleed for something that is not just yourself. The words stung not because they were cruel, but because they were too close to the truth. He had buried too many friends, watched his own legend twist into something he barely recognized. He was tired of stealing just to keep from disappearing. All right, he said again, the words settling heavy in his chest. I am in. The deal was done with no handshake, just three pairs of eyes agreeing that if they were to die, at least it would not be by accident. 2 days later, as the first pale light of dawn brushed the edges of Las Palmas, Billy stood in the narrow alley behind the bank, counting heartbeats. The town was already waking to chaos. On the far side, a column of smoke curled up from a burning hay barn the war party had set alight, shouts carrying through the streets like startled birds. He could hear the sheriff barking orders, the frantic clomp of boots as men ran toward the flames. Tala and Naira crouched behind him, their giant forms somehow making themselves small against the adobe wall. Their faces were painted for war, streaks of white and black across cheekbones and brows, and yet their eyes remained steady. Now, Billy hissed, and they moved as one. The rear door of the bank had been left with an old lock that had not met a man like Billy before. A few seconds with a narrow piece of metal and quiet patience, and it surrendered with a soft click. They slipped inside into a hush that felt almost holy after the noise outside. The vault waited like a squat iron beast at the back of the room, while shelves of ledgers and neat rows of safety boxes lined the walls. Billy went to work on the vault's outer mechanism, fingers quick and sure. Tala and Naira took positions by the windows, keeping watch. Everything was going according to plan, almost suspiciously so. The vault door groaned open at last, and a smell of dust and metal floated out. Brick after brick of coins and bundles of banknotes lay on the shelves, sleepy and unaware that their lives were about to be cut short. "You take what you can carry," Billy said, his mind already measuring weight and time. "Leave the rest for the stories." Tala stepped forward with a canvas sack, but Naira did not move. Her eyes had narrowed, head tilted. "Do you hear that?" she murmured. There was something in the air beneath the distant shouting. A quieter sound, like the creak of multiple boots on wooden boards, but not in the direction of the fire. Not outside, inside. Billy cursed under his breath and drew his gun. In the same instant, the front door of the bank slammed open, and the echo of authority filled the room. "All right, hands where I can see them." The sheriff of Las Palmas, a tall man with a neat mustache and a badge polished to a shine, stood flanked not just by his usual deputies, but by a half-circle of Apache men Billy had never seen before. They wore a mix of tribal clothing and bits of stolen soldier gear, and their eyes were cold. Among them, Billy recognized one or two faces he had glimpsed at Tala and Naira's camp days earlier. Men who had watched the twins with a mixture of respect and resentment. One of them, a broad man with a band of red cloth around his forehead, smiled with something like victory. "Drop your weapons, sisters," he said in Apache, his tone mocking. "Your warpath ends here." Tala's shoulders stiffened, her body tensing like a bow drawn to breaking, but she did not fire. Too many guns, too many angles. Naira's jaw clenched, her stake in this betrayal hitting deeper than any bullet. Billy flicked his gaze between the sheriff and the traitors, reading the truth in the distance they kept from each other. Allies of convenience, nothing more. "You have got to be kidding me," he muttered. The sheriff stepped closer, his gun unwavering. "Billy the Kid," he announced, savoring the name. "You are under arrest for attempted robbery, conspiracy with hostile Indians, and being too damned arrogant to stay out of my territory." Billy raised his hands slowly, his gun dangling from one finger for a second before he let it drop to the floor. Metal rang against the boards. He felt Tala and Naira shift beside him, their reluctance a palpable thing. "Careful, Sheriff," Billy said, his voice calm but edged. "Those hostile Indians you are standing next to look more like businessmen to me. What did you trade them for this little show? Land? Whiskey? A promise the army will ignore them while they sell out their own." The sheriff's jaw tightened, but his eyes flicked briefly toward the leader with the red headband. There it was, the crack in the story. "My arrangement with Chief Rowland's men is none of your concern," the sheriff snapped. "They bring in Billy the Kid. I make sure my town sleeps a little easier and their name stays off a few wanted posters. Everybody wins." "Not everybody," Naira said in English, her voice thick with contempt. "You betray our people for scraps." The man with the red band tightened his grip on his rifle. "We do what the chief will not," he retorted curtly. "He keeps chasing honor and ghosts. We chase survival. The world is changing. There is no room for women leading warriors, no matter how tall they stand." The words cut deep, but there was no time to bleed. One of the deputies stepped forward with irons, moving toward Billy. In that instant, instinct born from a lifetime of narrow escapes roared to life inside him. He glanced sideways at the twins, saw the same storm rising in their eyes, the refusal to die on anyone else's terms. "When I move," he whispered under his breath, barely shaping the words. "One heartbeat, two." The deputy reached for his wrist. Billy slammed his elbow back, catching the man square in the throat, and dropped to one knee as the deputy stumbled, gasping. In the same motion, he rolled toward the vault, scooping up his gun and firing without aiming. The shot blew the lamp on the wall to splinters, plunging the room into a chaos of smoke and sparks. Tala exploded into motion, her massive form tackling two Apaches at once, wrenching a rifle free and swinging it like a club. Naira darted toward the nearest window, shattering glass with one heavy boot and kicking it outward to clear a path. The next few seconds were a blur of shouts and gunfire, the enclosed space amplifying every sound to a deafening roar. Billy fired just enough to make men duck and dive, never staying in one place long enough to become a target. He saw Tala take a bullet in the upper arm, saw her barely flinch as she used the pain to drive a knee into an attacker's ribs. He saw Naira's fist connect with a deputy's jaw with the crack of breaking bone. But numbers were numbers. For every man who fell, 2 more filled the gap. The sheriff's voice cut through the chaos, ordering his men to aim for the Apaches, to bring down the giants first. Billy knew this fight could not be won, only survived. "Out!" he shouted, firing through the window frame to keep the street outside clear. "We are not dying in a banker's box." Naira lunged for Tala, half dragging her toward the shattered window. Tala resisted for a fraction of a second, wanting to stay and finish what she had started, but another bullet tore chips from the wall, an inch from her head. She relented, and together the twins dove through the broken window into the alley beyond, landing hard in a spray of glass. Billy followed, another shot ringing out as he slipped through the frame and rolled, feeling something hot graze his side. Pain flared, bright and sharp, but his legs still worked, and that was all that mattered. They ran. Behind them the sheriff shouted, and the sudden bark of more rifles told Billy the deputies were already giving chase. The alley twisted between buildings like a dry riverbed. They burst out onto a side street, just as a riderless horse bolted past, eyes rolling in fear from the distant fire. Billy grabbed the reins on instinct, swinging himself up in one fluid movement and hauling Tala up behind him despite the blood running from her arm. Naira vaulted onto a second horse left tied outside a shuttered store, snapping the rope with a jerk. "Ride!" Billy yelled. The desert swallowed them in a rush of wind and hooves and pounding hearts. They rode until the town shrank to a smear of smoke on the horizon, and the sun was high and cruel above them. Only then did they slow. Horses lathered, lungs burning. Tala's wound was bleeding steadily, dark patches spreading on her buckskin. Naira's lip was split, and there was a purpling bruise forming along her jaw where a rifle butt had glanced off. Billy himself felt like someone had taken a knife made of fire and drawn it across his ribs. "My hideout is not far," he said, breathing hard. "And no, that is not the first time I have said that to people who just tried to rob a bank with me." It was a weak joke, but it earned a short, rough laugh from Tala. "Lead the way, small man," she muttered, "before we fall off these horses." Billy's hideout was a narrow canyon 3 miles off the main trail, hidden by a curtain of scrub and rock. An old line shack nestled inside, half collapsed, with a spring that still trickled from the canyon wall. He had found it years earlier and kept it like a secret letter folded at the bottom of a trunk. Now it became the only safe place left in a world that had just shrunk considerably. He tended their wounds with the clumsy care of someone who had learned medicine from necessity and whiskey. Tala's arm wound went clean through the meat, missing bone and artery by pure luck. Naira had a graze along her side and a few cuts that would scar but not slow her for long. Billy's own side looked worse than it was, blood more dramatic than deep. Still, by the time he finished binding them all, his hands shook with exhaustion. Days passed in that canyon, like time had forgotten them. The outside world narrowed to the creak of old boards, the sound of water over stone, the harsh cries of hawks overhead. Tala and Naira healed slowly, their great bodies knitting muscle and skin with stubborn refusal to break. In the evenings, when the worst of the pain ebbed, they would sit outside the shack under the spill of stars that seemed close enough to pluck from the sky. They spoke of many things, sometimes in English, sometimes in Apache, which Billy only half understood but listened to like music. He learned that Tala and Naira were the daughters of Chief Mangus Roka, a man who still thundered against both the army and the younger warriors who wanted to trade rage for compromise. They had grown taller than every boy by the time they were 12, stronger than most men by 15. They had fought beside their father since first blood, their names whispered with both pride and resentment in the camps. "They say we do not know how to be wives," Naira said one night, her gaze fixed on the fire. "They say we should have been born sons." There was a loneliness in her voice that no battlefield could fill. Maybe the Creator wanted to see how frightened men might look when their daughters grew taller than their fear. Billy replied lightly. Then softer, "I know something about not fitting into the place people carve for you." Tala glanced at him across the flames. "You were not born with a gun in your hand, Billy," she said. "Somebody put it there. Somebody or something." He did not answer for a long time. The frogs at the spring sang, and a coyote called somewhere far off. Finally he said, "I was born small in a world that loves to step on small things. A gun is just a longer arm. Easier to reach back when someone reaches for you first." Naira watched him with those dark, measuring eyes. "You have killed men who deserved it," she said, "and men who did not. Both are ghosts that follow you." "You think I do not know that?" he said quietly. Every time someone tells a story about me, they sand the edges off the truth. The kid this, the kid that. Nobody wants to hear about the nights I wake up choking on a name I cannot forget. They want to hear how fast my hand is. They fell silent again, but it was a companionable silence, heavy with the knowledge that none of them were clean, and none of them entirely lost. On another night, when the moon was a thin, bright scar over the canyon, Tala sat with her injured arm bare, the bandage off, letting the air toughen the new skin. Billy sat beside her, close enough to feel the warmth coming off her large frame. "You saved us," she said abruptly, "back in the bank. If you had not started that fight, they would have taken us in irons, or shot us where we stood," Naira added from the doorway. The sheriff does not like tall stories walking around to correct him. Billy shrugged one shoulder, uncomfortable with gratitude. "I did not do it for you," he lied. "I just dislike banks and men who think they have already won." Tala turned her head, studying him, then reached out with her good hand and cupped the side of his face, her palm nearly covering his jaw and ear. Her touch was surprisingly gentle for someone who could break a rifle stock over her knee. "Lies sit badly on your tongue," she murmured, "but I will let this one pass." His breath caught for a moment, a flicker of something sharp and tender passing between them. He had never felt so small and yet so seen. Later, when the nights grew colder and their wounds had closed into itching scars, they shared blankets in the shack, not in a fever of lust but in a quiet, aching closeness born from shared danger. Tala's arm went around him once as they lay listening to the wind, and he did not pull away. Naira, on the other side, rested a hand lightly over his chest as if to reassure herself that his heart still beat. He lay between them, staring up at the roof, wondering when exactly the man who swore he would die alone had started counting 2 giant warrior women among the few lives he would hesitate to trade for his own. They were not lovers in the way the Saloon stories would eventually tell it, not yet. They were something rougher and more fragile, like the first green shoot pushing up through a burned field. None of them had words for it, so they did not try to name it. Far beyond the canyon walls, the world kept moving. The traitorous Apaches who had sold them out rode back to Chief Manga's Rosha with lies ready on their tongues. They told him Billy the Kid had taken his daughters hostage after a failed robbery, that he had used them as shields and fled while the warriors bled. They said the sheriff had blamed the entire war band, and now the army would come, not just for the traitors, but for every camp. They left out their own bargain, the quiet promise traded in the sheriff's office: "Bring us Billy the Kid, and we will look away from whatever else you do." Chief Manga's Rosha, burdened with years and memories of too many broken treaties, listened with a deepening scowl. If he had heard his daughters were dead, he would have howled his grief to the mountains. But kidnapped, used, shamed? His anger took on a different shape. The old ways demanded blood to balance such an insult. He summoned warriors from every nearby band, his voice still carrying the weight that had sent soldiers running years before. They would find the outlaw who had taken what was his, and they would make an example that even white men's newspapers could not forget. The traitors smiled behind their solemn faces. They knew exactly where to look. They had seen Billy's horse take the canyon trail, had watched from a distance as he half-carried Tala and Naira into the hiding place. They said nothing about this part, only guided the war party steadily closer over the course of days, pretending to follow tracks they already knew too well. In the canyon, Billy felt the shift before he heard it. An old instinct, the prickle on the back of his neck that had saved his life more times than he could count, gnawed at him one morning just after sunrise. The air felt too still, like the world was holding its breath. The birds had gone quiet. He stepped out of the shack, squinting up toward the rim. A small rock tumbled down the canyon wall, bounced once, twice, and skittered to a stop near his boot. He did not look up. Instead, he called over his shoulder, voice even, "We have company." Tala and Naira emerged, eyes already sharp. They moved to either side of him, their height turning the worn clearing into a makeshift battlefield. A moment later, Apaches appeared along the rim, silhouettes against the brightening sky, then down the path that led into the canyon. There were many of them, more than Billy would have ever chosen to face even on his best day. At their head rode Manga's Rosha himself, his hair streaked with gray, his face a map of every loss and every victory. Beside him, smiling like a wolf that smelled blood, rode the man with the red headband. Billy did not reach for his guns, not yet. To do so would be to invite a slaughter no one could win. Tala's breath came slow and controlled. Naira's hands opened and closed at her sides. When Mangas Rosha dismounted and stepped into the dusty clearing, he carried himself with the weight of a man used to deciding fates. His gaze swept over his daughters, then fixed on Billy with a fury that could have burned down a lesser man. "You are Billy the Kid," he said in accented but firm English. "You take my daughters for your own shield. You lead them into white men's bullets for your own profit. You hide them in a hole in the earth like stolen cattle. And you do it all while my people pay the price." The words fell heavy and wrong, like stones dropped into clear water. Tala stepped forward, ignoring the line of spears and rifles pointed in her direction. "Father," she began, "that is not." "Silence," Mangas Rosha thundered. "The command more habit than cruelty. You will have your say when this vulture is gone." Billy felt heat rise in his chest. He had been called many things: outlaw, murderer, thief, legend, but the idea that he would use these women as shields dug under his skin like a splinter. Still, he bit back his first anger and spoke carefully. "Chief," he said, inclining his head just enough to show respect without surrender. "They came to me. They asked for my help to rob a bank that has been robbing you for years. I did not take them anywhere they did not choose to go. When your own men betrayed them to the sheriff, I am the one who made sure they were not dragged off in chains." A murmur ran through the assembled warriors, surprised and uneasy. The man with the red headband snarled. "Lies," he spat in Apache. "You let a white outlaw twist your mind, Chief. He is clever, that one. His tongue is as quick as his gun." Tala rounded on him, eyes blazing. "You dare speak of twisting minds, Kosa," she snapped. "You, who sold us to the sheriff for a handful of silver, and the promise you could strut like a rooster in front of frightened boys." The accusation rippled outward, hitting ears that had not heard it spoken so plainly. Kosa's jaw clenched. "You think the old ways will save us?" he shot back. "You think standing tall in front of a line of bluecoat rifles will bring back the dead? We did what we had to. You, sister, you did what you wanted. You followed your pride and your white outlaw into a foolish scheme. Do not blame me when it shattered." Mangas Roja raised a hand, and both fell silent as if someone had cut their voices with a knife. His gaze moved from Tala to Kosa, from Billy to Naira. The chief's eyes were not the eyes of a fool. They were the eyes of a man trying to read a story from too few lines. "Enough," he said. "Words are wind. I will see truth with my own eyes." He turned to his warriors. "Take the outlaw. If he resists, shoot him. If he submits, bind him, and we will let the spirits decide his guilt." Rifles shifted, a metal whisper. Billy felt Tala's arm brush his, Naira's breath at his shoulder. He smiled then, a small crooked thing that had nothing to do with humor. "Well," he murmured to them, "could be this is where the legend ends." Tala's voice was steady. "If you die today, so do I." "And I," Naira added. There was no bravado in it, just fact. Billy swallowed. He could accept his own death. He had been walking beside it for years. But the thought of these two, who had already lost so much, falling because of his name, made something harden inside him. He took a step forward, away from them. "You want me?" he called, raising his hands slightly. "Then let us settle this the way the stories like it. No guns, no firing squad, no traitors hiding behind other men's rifles." He glanced directly at Kosa, letting the word traitor hang in the air. "You say I used your daughters? He says they used me. All I know is some man with a red rag on his head sold us all out for a deal with a sheriff. So let us fight it out, hands and feet and whatever the Creator gave us. If I lose, you can string me from the nearest tree and the papers will get their pretty picture. If Kosa and his friends lose, then you will know what kind of men you have been listening to." The clearing went very still. Mangas Roja regarded Billy with something like surprise, then with grim respect. "You would fight without guns," he said. "You, whose life has been a bullet and a name?" Billy shrugged, feeling his own heart hammering. "Maybe I am tired of letting iron make all my choices. Maybe I want to feel the weight of what I do with my own hands." Tala's lips parted, a flicker of pride and fear crossing her face. Naira's fingers tightened at her sides. Kosa barked a harsh laugh. "You are small," he said with contempt. "You expect to stand against us with your bare hands, little white coyote?" "You afraid to try?" Billy shot back. The insult struck home. No Apache warrior wanted to be seen dodging a challenge, especially in front of his chief, especially in front of the women he had betrayed. Mangas Roja lifted his hand again, calling for silence that he already had. "So be it," he said after a long moment. "No guns, no knives. Only what the Mother Earth has grown in you since you took your first breath. Billy the Kid against Kosa and the ones who rode with him to betray my daughter's trust." He turned to his daughters. "You will stand beside the outlaw," he said. "If you believe he speaks true, you will prove it with your bodies. If you do not, you may step away now." Tala stepped forward so quickly that dust rose around her boots. "I stand with him," she said, "in this life and whatever waits after." Naira followed, her smaller, scarred hand resting briefly on Billy's shoulder. "So do I." That simple touch steadied him more than any drink ever had. The warriors formed a loose circle, leaving a space in the center of the canyon clearing. Rifles were placed aside. Knives came out of belts and were laid on a nearby rock. The air tasted like electricity, the moment before a storm breaks. Kosa and 3 of his closest followers stepped into the circle opposite Billy and the twins. They were all taller than him, broader than him, men who had wrestled horses to the ground and broken enemies' bones with their bare hands. Billy flexed his fingers, feeling every scar, every memory of fists thrown, knuckles split. He had fought barehanded before, usually when a gun jammed or a bar fight turned interesting, but never like this. Never with so much truth balanced on the outcome. "Stay behind us," Tala murmured. "Use our height. Move when we move." "I am not hiding," Billy retorted. "I know," she replied softly. "That is what scares me." Mangas Roja raised his arm, then dropped it. The fight began. Kosa charged first, aiming straight for Billy, wanting to end the legend quickly and violently. The kid sidestepped, the motion more like a dancer's than a brawler's, thanks to a life spent dodging bullets. Kosa's hand still caught his shoulder, fingers like iron clamps, spinning him around. Before Kosa could drive a fist into his ribs, Tala was there, slamming her forearm into Kosa's chest with the force of a falling tree. He staggered back, air leaving him in a grunt. One of his men lunged for Tala's legs, trying to bring the giant woman down. Naira intercepted him, grabbing his wrist and twisting, using his own momentum to flip him over her hip. He hit the ground hard, dust exploding around him. The circle of watching warriors shouted, half in shock, half in excitement. Billy ducked a punch from another traitor, felt it whistle past his ear, and drove his own fist into the man's stomach. It was like punching a sack of grain tied with rope. Pain flared in his knuckles, but the man bent forward with a strangled sound, giving Billy just enough space to slam his knee upward. The traitor's head snapped back, eyes rolling for a moment. Hands grabbed Billy from behind, thick arms wrapping around his chest, squeezing. Breath shot from his lungs. He drove his elbows back again and again, feeling bone and muscle give under the repeated blows. The hold loosened. He twisted, dropped his weight suddenly, slipped free. A fist came out of nowhere and caught him across the cheek, sending him stumbling. The world tilted. For an instant, he saw the sky instead of the canyon walls. Then Tala's voice cut through the haze, a roar in Apache that he did not understand but felt in his bones. He saw her slam into Kosa like a thunderclap, the two of them grappling, giant against giant, each trying to twist the other's weight. They crashed into the dust, rolled, rose again. Naira fought with a different rhythm, more like water than stone. She flowed around heavy strikes, using leverage and angle instead of sheer power. She drove one man to his knees, then swept his legs with a quick kick that sent him flat. Billy found himself breathing in time with her movements, his smaller frame darting into openings that her height created. He ducked under an arm, hooked a heel, shoved at a knee already wobbling from Naira's earlier blow. For the first time in a long time, he was fighting alongside someone, not just for himself. Kosa managed to break free of Tala's grip and delivered a brutal elbow to her injured arm. Pain contorted her features, that old wound ripping open. She faltered, and Kosa seized her by the braids, yanking her head back. "Too tall to bow?" he snarled. "I can fix that." Naira cried out and started toward them, but another warrior lunged in her path. Billy did not think. He launched himself at Kosa, driving low, wrapping his arms around the bigger man's knees. Kosa was not expecting an attack from below. They went down hard, Tala tumbling with them. Dust choked Billy's throat as they rolled. Kosa's fist smashed into his ribs once, twice, sending white flashes across his vision. Billy's hands scrabbled for purchase and found Kosa's wrist. He twisted with everything in him, feeling tendons strain, hearing a sharp crack that could have been bone or pride. Kosa roared in pain and let go of Tala's hair. In that breath of freedom, Tala struck. She surged up, ignoring the fire in her arm, and brought her forearm crashing down across Kosa's chest and neck, pinning him to the ground. He thrashed, but her weight was too much even for him. Dust streaked her face, sweat and blood mingling, but her eyes burned. "You sold us," she hissed. "You sold your sisters for a lie. This is the man you want as your future father?" Around them, the other fighters had slowed, breathing hard, faces marked by bruises and swelling. The traitors were on the ground more than on their feet now, groaning, spitting blood into the dust. Naira held one in a chokehold that she relaxed as his resistance faded, letting him slump. Billy stood unsteadily, chest heaving, a cut above his eye dripping warm down the side of his face. The circle of watching warriors had gone utterly silent. Every eye was fixed on the scene in the center. Tala holding Kosa down, Billy swaying beside her, Naira looming over them both like a dark sentinel. Mangas Roja stepped into the circle. For a moment, there was no old age in him, only the fierce young warrior he had been, summoned back for one last judgment. He looked at Kosa first. "I asked you once," he said quietly in Apache, "if what you did was for our people or for yourself. You told me survival. Now I see you meant comfort." He turned his gaze to Billy, then to his daughters. This outlaw, this small, stubborn man with too many enemies and too much pride, he risked his life to drag you out of a white man's trap. You risked yours to stand beside him when the easier choice was to let him die. He raised his voice so all could hear. "I am old, but I am not blind. The spirits do not care about the color of a man's skin. They care about the weight of his actions." He nodded once to Tala. "Release him." She drew back, letting Kosa slump into the dust. Relief shuddered through her muscles. Kosa coughed, tried to push himself up, and found spears pointed inches from his throat, not in mercy, but in warning. The men who had ridden with him looked away, ashamed or afraid. Mangas Roja spoke again, his tone like stone. "Kosa and those who followed his bargain will leave this place," he decreed. "They will take their greed and their fear with them. They are no longer welcome at my fires. If the white sheriff loves them so much, let him feed them when their bellies grow empty." A murmur of agreement rose from the warriors. Exile was a harsh punishment, sometimes harsher than death. Kosa's eyes flashed with hatred, but beneath it, Billy saw fear. Fear of being small in a world that had never taught him how. For a heartbeat, he almost pitied the man. Almost. Mangas Roja turned at last to Billy and his daughters. The fire in his gaze softened, though it did not disappear. "Billy the Kid," he said, "the stories I have heard of you are full of smoke and blood. But today, I saw you fight for more than your own shadow. You put yourself between my daughters and the men who would harm them. Not for gold, not for glory. For something even a fool can see is simple. You could not stand aside." Billy shrugged, tasting copper and dust. "Maybe I'm just bad at minding my own business," he said. A faint smile ghosted across the old chief's mouth. "Or maybe you are less rotten than your reputation," he replied. "My daughters are warriors. They have carried my name and my people's hope on their backs for many years. It is time they carry something that is theirs alone." He looked to Tala and Naira. "The world is changing. I cannot keep you from walking beyond the edge of our lands, nor can I choose whose campfire you sit beside. But I can give you my blessing so the gossips have one less weapon." He faced Billy squarely. "You have my respect," he said. "And if you and my daughters choose it, you have my blessing as well. Let the desert hear it. Tala and Naira, daughters of Mangas Roja, may take this small, reckless outlaw as their husband." A gasp rippled through the watching warriors. Even in changeable times, such a union was no small thing. The twins stared at their father, surprise flickering across faces that rarely showed hesitation. Billy felt the world tilt again, this time without any fists involved. Marriage had never been on his list of plans. His life did not lend itself to vows spoken under open skies. Yet, standing there with his ribs aching and his eye bleeding, he realized that whatever had begun in that canyon shack, whatever fragile thread had woven between his restless soul and the steady strength of these women, was not something he wanted to see cut. Tala stepped closer to him, towering over him as always, but there was a question in her eyes for the first time. "Well, little legend," she said quietly enough that only he and Naira could hear. "Do you run, or do you stay?" Naira's gaze was intent, almost vulnerable. Billy took a slow breath, feeling the dust in his lungs, the weight of the gathered eyes, the familiar pull of the open trail tugging at his spine. He thought of dying alone in a ditch somewhere, his name misprinted in a newspaper, his bones found by strangers. Then he thought of the shack, the shared blankets, the sound of Tala's low laugh and Naira's soft singing when she thought no one was listening. He thought of how, for the first time, his story might be tied to something bigger than his own legend. "I have been running my whole damned life," he said, loud enough for the nearest warriors to hear. "Maybe it is time I tried something harder." He turned to Mangas Roja, then back to Tala and Naira. "If you will have me," he said, his voice roughening, "I will stand with you. I cannot promise I will stop making trouble. In fact, I am pretty sure that is impossible. But I can promise this. I will not turn my back on you. Not in a bank, not in a canyon, not when the whole world is lined up against us." Tala's face broke into a grin that seemed to start in her chest and move outward, rare and radiant. Naira's eyes shone with something that might have been moisture, though she would likely deny it later. "We do not want you to stop making trouble," Naira said. "We want you to make it with us." "Then it is settled," Tala declared. "We will share your path, Billy the Kid, and you will share ours, whatever comes." Mangas Roja nodded once, solemnly, then lifted his hands to the sky, murmuring a blessing in Apache that rolled over the canyon like distant thunder. The warriors bowed their heads. The wind picked up, carrying away the last bitter taste of betrayal and leaving behind something cleaner, if no less dangerous. They did not celebrate with church bells or rings. They celebrated by sitting together at the edge of the canyon that evening, eating meat roasted over an open fire, the warriors telling stories that for once did not feature only death and loss. Billy sat between Tala and Naira, their shoulders warm against his. Below them, the desert stretched out, vast and indifferent, the sky overhead painted in strokes of orange and purple. "So," Billy said after a while, a lopsided smile tugging at his swollen lip, "married to 2 giant Apache warriors. Never thought that would be the way my story turned." "Your story is not just yours anymore," Naira replied. "It is ours. And it is still being written," Tala added. Do not get lazy just because you have a wife on each side to pull you up when you fall." He chuckled, the sound surprising even himself. Lazy is one thing I have never been accused of. They knew better than to pretend the road ahead would be easy. The sheriff of Las Palmas would not forget his humiliation. The army would still march. The railroad men would still hunger for land that did not belong to them. Billy's face would still stare out from wanted posters nailed to bar doors and telegraph poles, and Apache camps would still be whispered about as threats instead of homes. But now, when they rode into new towns, Tala and Naira towering on either side of him, their presence turning every street into a question, they did so with a strange, fierce peace in their chests. They robbed where they saw fit, not out of greed, but out of a crooked sense of justice, taking from those who had taken too much. Sometimes they left more than they stole, slipping coins into the hands of widows and orphans, leaving sacks of grain at the edge of hungry villages. Word spread quietly, stories mutating as they always did. Some said Billy the Kid had become a spirit bound to two giant Apache ghosts, killing corrupt sheriffs in the night. Others said he had been tamed by love and no longer drew his guns. The truth, as always, walked a narrower path. Billy still drew fast when he had to. Tala and Naira still fought like twin storms. They laughed, argued, bled, and healed together. On some mornings, when the sun was just peeking over the mesas and their horses stamped impatiently at the edge of a new town, Billy would look at the two women beside him and feel a strange, quiet certainty settle over him. He was still an outlaw. He was still a man with too many ghosts. But he was no longer just a shadow running from the past. He was part of something that might, if the world was paying attention, be remembered not just for the bullets fired, but for the lives refused to be broken. And if the law, or fate, or some jealous gunman finally caught up with him one day, he took a certain comfort in knowing this. Somewhere on the high desert wind, there would be a story told of how Billy the Kid once stood with two towering Apache sisters against traitors and sheriffs and the weight of a dying world, and chose not to run. If you rode with this story all the way to the end, take a moment to give it your own verdict, from 0 to 10. And if you would like to hear more tales from the dusty edge of the Old West, do not forget to subscribe and leave a like so the trail does not grow cold.